I remember generating lots of movement from chant scores, and then starting with that movement, and then sort of finding meaning through the movement that came up from the chant scores. And this was a new process for me. Is this sort of a way that you would say you typically work, or?
I usually try to have some movement coming from the dancers and some movement coming from me in the same piece. And one way of having a little bit more control over the work that's coming out of the dancers is to create a score that has commands on it that I think will be suitable to the thematic development that I'm thinking of. So I'm not just asking the dancers to improvise, but rather to create a phrase based on certain specific directions. I also create a rhythm because of how I want the dancers to have both very quick movement and slower movement, that kind of thing. I want to be able to correlate the dancers within the piece. So yes, it's typical in lots of ways, especially as I've gotten older and less interested in developing and exploring movement itself, but more in the structure of the dance. Sometimes I have the music, and that gives me a clue of the direction I'm going in. Sometimes I have a working idea or an image in my head, or particular dancers that I'm interested in working with. And so I start from somewhere and develop the score in that way. So some scores are very specific, like lunge on your right foot. Others are more like settle, which is a lot more freedom for the dancer.
Mine was created pretty recently, just not even a year ago. So there hasn't been really a lot of space in between the performances. As you're working now in rehearsals, are you seeing a lot of need for change? And you have almost all new dancers?
I have almost all new dancers, and so in some ways there is going to be change. But the structure of the piece will stay the same. Some of the movement will change. I've already made some small changes just with things that, with your cast, we got close to the end and I didn't feel like imposing changes on the cast at that point. So I just withheld, but I knew that those places needed to be further developed in some way.
Do you ever sort of have any questions or fears ever about where a piece might lead if you're not, given this element of chance? Really?
I'm actually always very interested in where it's going to lead. And sometimes I have no clue for a long time. But at some point in the dance, usually about halfway through, I sit down with myself and make a decision about where the piece is going so that I can construct the totality of the piece to make sense. So it's not, the structure is very determined, but often I find that I haven't really realized what I was doing. I was just working intuitively and in a craft-like manner to end up with something that is beyond the craft, that has more meaning.
Have you ever been just completely surprised or taken aback by what you've kind of...
Well, actually, Time, the dance I'm showing, was a surprise to me when I finally realized that it was a period where my dad had died recently, and I had watched him get older into his 90s and thought a lot about aging during that period. And then he died during the rehearsal period, and then when I sat down with myself with that piece, I decided that the lead dancer had to evolve in some way. There had to be something that was going on. And I decided to make her die, or take her out of the group in some definite way. And at the end, when the piece was made and the dancers were able to perform it, I looked at it and was able to see that it had been about this aging and knowledge of death.